And here is the Artist's Almanac for February 7th, 2018. It's the anniversary of the Bonfire of the Vanities, which happened this day in 1497 Florence, Italy, when supporters of the Dominican friar and Puritan fanatic Girolamo Savonarola collected and publicly burned thousands of objects that might tempt one to sin. Savonarola became moral dictator of the city of Florence when the Medici were temporarily driven out in 1494, and had a reputation for austerity and as a formidably effective hellfire preacher, obsessing over perceived human wickedness and convincing his followers that the wrath of God was about to fall upon the earth. Savonarola detested practically every form of pleasure and relaxation, and grimly disapproved of jokes and frivolity, of poetry and inns, sex, especially the homosexual variety, gambling, fine clothes and jewelry, and luxury of any sort. He especially denounced the works of Boccaccio and the whole humanistic culture of the Italian Renaissance, putting an end to the carnivals and festivals the Florentines traditionally enjoyed, and substituting religious festivals instead, and employed street urchins as a junior Gestapo to sniff out the injurious and suspect items. Not surprisingly, Savonarola made many powerful enemies, most notably the silk and gold-loving Borgia Pope Alexander VI, who eventually excommunicated the rigorous friar. On Palm Sunday in 1498, Savonarola was arrested by the Florentine authorities with two friars who were among his most ardent followers. All three were tortured before being condemned as heretics and handed over to the secular arm by two papal commissioners, who came hotfoot from Rome for the purpose on May 19th. Fra Silvestro and Fra Domenico were hanged first, before Savonarola climbed the ladder to the place between them. With the piles of wood below the scaffold set alight, the flames quickly engulfed the three dangling bodies, while a trick of the heat made Savonarola's right hand move, so that he seemed to be blessing the spectators. What little was left of the three Dominicans was thrown into the river Arno, and the Renaissance marched on. It's also the birthday of famed writer and social critic Charles Dickens, born in Hampshire, England in 1812. Dickens created some of the world's best-loved fictional characters and is widely regarded as the greatest novelist of the Victorian era. His works enjoyed unprecedented popularity during his lifetime, and by the 20th century, critics and scholars have recognized him as a literary genius. Dickens left school to work in a factory when his father was jailed in a debtor's prison. Despite his lack of formal education, Dickens edited a weekly journal for 20 years, wrote 15 novels, 5 novellas, hundreds of short stories and nonfiction articles, lectured and performed readings extensively, was an indefatigable letter writer, and campaigned vigorously for children's rights, education, and other social reforms. A few of his best-known works include Great Expectations, A Christmas Carol, Nicholas Nickleby, and A Tale of Two Cities. A fierce critic of the poverty and social stratification of Victorian society, Dickens' second novel, Oliver Twist, shocked readers with its images of poverty and crime, and made impossible any pretense to ignorance about what poverty entailed. At a time when Britain was the major economic and political power of the world, Dickens highlighted the life of the forgotten poor and disadvantaged within society. Through his journalism, he campaigned on specific issues, such as sanitation and the workhouse, but his fiction probably demonstrated its greatest prowess in changing public opinion in regard to class inequalities. His writings inspired others, in particular journalists and political figures, to address the problems of class oppression. Karl Marx asserted that Dickens issued to the world more political and social truths than have been uttered by all the professional politicians, publicists, and moralists put together. And George Bernard Shaw remarked that Great Expectations was more seditious than Marx's Das Kapital. From hundreds of memorable quotes, both personal and fictional, I've picked one of my favorites. Over a century before the fate of nations hung in the balance between Facebook and Twitter, Dickens had this to say: Electric communication will never be a substitute for the face of someone who with their soul encourages another person to be brave and true. A quote we'd all do well to think on by literary colossus of the Victorian age, sympathizer with the poor, suffering, and oppressed, and one of England's greatest writers, Charles Dickens, who died of a stroke at his home after a full day's work of writing Edwin Drood on June 8, 1870, at the age of 58. Thanks for listening. Be kind, do good work, and until next time.